In 1953, a mother in West Virginia could feed her husband and 4 children breakfast for 11 cents. 11 cents. She used lard, day-old bread, and 1 egg. Today, that same family spends $14 on cereal and milk that expires in a week. But here is the part nobody tells you. Number 17 on this list was so common that the USDA actually recommended it during the Korean War, and modern nutritionists are now saying it was healthier than anything in the breakfast aisle at Walmart. Number 4 involves a chemical reaction so effective that food scientists at Cornell spent 3 years trying to figure out why it works better than any modern leavener on the market. These 25 breakfasts fed America through recessions, layoffs, and winters when the furnace ran out of oil. They cost almost nothing. They kept men working 12-hour shifts and children running to school with full bellies. And every single one of them disappeared because cereal companies, frozen food brands, and fast food chains spent billions in advertising to make you forget your grandmother ever cooked. Before we start, hit that subscribe button, because what you are about to learn might change the way you eat tomorrow morning. Let us count down the 25 smartest poor man breakfasts that vanished from American kitchens. Number 25, bread and bacon grease. Before butter was affordable and margarine was trusted, bacon grease was the spread of the American working class. Mothers saved every drop of rendered fat in a coffee can beside the stove, and mornings started with a thick slice of white bread smeared with a spoonful of warm drippings and a shake of salt. In 1952, a loaf of bread cost about 14 cents. The grease was free, a byproduct of Sunday's bacon that would have been thrown away in any modern kitchen. Children ate it standing at the counter, school books tucked under one arm, while fathers wrapped a second slice in wax paper for the lunch pail. The flavor was smoky, salty, and deeply savory, nothing like the bland toast and margarine that replaced it. Nutritionists demonized animal fats in the 1970s, and the coffee can disappeared from the stovetop almost overnight. But recent studies have shown that bacon grease contains less saturated fat than butter. We threw away flavor and tradition because of science that turned out to be incomplete. Number 24, cornmeal mush. In Appalachia and across the rural South, breakfast often began with a pot of cornmeal mush so thick a wooden spoon would stand upright in it. Mothers stirred cornmeal into boiling salted water and cooked it low and slow until it turned creamy and smooth. A 5-pound sack of cornmeal cost about 20 cents, and it lasted the family 2 weeks of breakfasts. Served hot with a drizzle of sorghum molasses or a splash of buttermilk, it was the meal that kept sharecroppers and coal miners on their feet until noon. Children scraped their bowls clean. Fathers ate in silence, savoring the warmth before heading into the cold. The leftover mush was poured into a loaf pan, chilled overnight, sliced and fried in lard the next morning until golden and crispy on both sides. That fried version, served with a fried egg on top, was Saturday morning's reward. Today, cornmeal mush has been completely erased by instant oatmeal packets and sugary cereals. A breakfast that cost 1 penny per serving was replaced by one that costs $1 and delivers half the nutrition. Number 23, milk toast. When someone in the family was sick, when money was tight, or when there was simply nothing else in the cupboard, mothers made milk toast. A slice of bread was toasted, buttered lightly, placed in a bowl, and covered with warm milk seasoned with salt and a tiny pinch of sugar. That was it. The bread softened into a warm, comforting porridge-like meal that went down easy and cost almost nothing. In the 1950s, milk was delivered to the doorstep for about 20 cents a quart. Combined with day-old bread, milk toast fed children who had upset stomachs and adults who had empty wallets equally well. The simplicity was the point. No skill required, no special ingredients, just warmth and sustenance in a bowl. By the 1970s, milk toast had vanished entirely, replaced by canned soup and crackers. But anyone who grew up eating it will tell you that nothing since has matched its quiet, gentle comfort on a cold morning. Number 22, red-eye gravy and biscuits. In the rural South, country ham was sliced thin, fried hard in a cast-iron skillet, and the pan was deglazed with black coffee. That was red-eye gravy. The name came from the reddish eye of fat that formed in the center of the gravy when it settled. Mothers split open fresh buttermilk biscuits and ladled that thin, salty, coffee-tinged gravy over the top. The combination was savory, bitter, and rich all at once. A country ham cost about 45 cents a pound in 1954, but it was so salty and intense that a single slice could flavor the whole pan. The coffee was already brewed. The biscuits were made from flour, lard, and buttermilk that cost pennies. The whole breakfast fed 6 for less than a quarter. Red-eye gravy cannot be found in any restaurant chain in America today. It is too simple, too regional, and too tied to a way of cooking that requires a cast-iron skillet seasoned by decades of use. Fast food killed it, but the flavor haunts everyone who ever tasted it. Number 21, oatmeal with lard. Before brown sugar and maple syrup became standard oatmeal toppings, families who could not afford sweeteners stirred a spoonful of lard and a pinch of salt into their morning oats. The fat made the oatmeal rich and filling, stretching a bowl that might have left a working man hungry by 9 o'clock into fuel that lasted until lunch. A canister of rolled oats cost about 19 cents in 1955. The lard was already sitting by the stove. Children did not love it. They ate it because there was nothing else, and because mothers stood at the stove watching until every spoonful was gone. The unsweetened, savory version of oatmeal has been completely forgotten. Today we drown oats in sugar, honey, and flavored syrups, never realizing that the original American way to eat oatmeal was salty, fatty, and simple. Nutritionists now recommend adding healthy fats to oatmeal for sustained energy. Our great-grandmothers figured that out 70 years ago with a tin of lard. Number 20, fried egg sandwich. Not the elaborate creations on Instagram with avocado and sriracha. The 1950s fried egg sandwich was one egg, fried in bacon grease until the edges laced brown and crispy, slapped between 2 slices of white bread with salt and pepper. That was breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner. Eggs cost about 60 cents a dozen in 1956. 1 egg per sandwich meant breakfast for the whole family cost less than a dime. Factory workers ate them wrapped in newspaper on the bus. Children ate them at the kitchen table while mothers packed lunches. The bread soaked up the runny yolk, and the grease from the pan gave it a flavor that no amount of artisan sourdough could replicate. We have turned the fried egg sandwich into a gourmet item that costs $8 at a brunch spot. In 1955, it was the cheapest meal a mother could make, and it was perfect exactly the way it was. Number 19, tomato gravy. First pattern break. In the Ozarks and across the Upper South, tomato gravy was the answer when the pantry held nothing but canned tomatoes and flour. Mothers made a simple roux with bacon drippings and flour, then stirred in a can of stewed tomatoes, mashing them into a thick, tangy gravy that was ladled over biscuits or cornbread. The whole dish cost less than 15 cents and could feed a table of 8. The acidity of the tomatoes cut through the richness of the fat, creating something that tasted far more complex than its ingredients had any right to. During the Depression, tomato gravy kept entire communities alive. By the 1950s, it had become a breakfast tradition so embedded in rural culture that families never thought to write the recipe down. Everyone just knew. When those families moved to cities for factory jobs, tomato gravy stayed behind. Their children grew up on toast and jelly and never learned that their grandmothers started every morning with something better. Food historians at the University of Mississippi have called tomato gravy one of the most important lost dishes in American culinary history. It fed millions, and almost nobody remembers it. Number 18, creamed chipped beef. Soldiers brought this one home from the war and it stuck. Dried beef, shredded and simmered in a white flour gravy, spooned over toast. The military called it by a name we cannot say on this channel. Mothers called it creamed beef on toast and served it every Tuesday. A jar of dried chipped beef cost about 30 cents in 1955, and it made enough for the whole family. The gravy was nothing but butter, flour, and milk, the cheapest white sauce imaginable. Children loved it or hated it. There was no middle ground, but it was hot, salty, filling, and ready in 10 minutes. Veterans ate it with a strange nostalgia, remembering mess halls and muddy camps. By the 1980s, dried chipped beef had disappeared from most grocery stores, replaced by deli meats and pre-made breakfast sandwiches. A dish that fed an entire generation of American men through the worst war in history, then fed their families for decades after, simply vanished. Number 17, flour gravy and biscuits. Second pattern break. Controversy incoming. This is the breakfast that the USDA actually promoted during the Korean War because it was cheap and filling and could be made with pantry staples that lasted for months. Mothers made a roux with 2 tablespoons of lard and 2 tablespoons of flour, cooked it until golden, then slowly whisked in milk until it thickened into sawmill gravy. Poured over split biscuits, it was the foundation of the Southern breakfast. The entire meal cost less than a dime. But here is what the food industry does not want you to know. When cereal companies like Kellogg's and General Mills launched their national advertising campaigns in the 1950s and the 1960s, they specifically targeted families who made biscuits and gravy. The message was clear: modern mothers serve cereal, old-fashioned mothers stand over a stove. It worked. Within a generation, homemade biscuits and gravy went from daily breakfast to weekend novelty. Those companies made billions selling cornflakes to families who had been eating better for free. Meanwhile, sawmill gravy contains flour, fat, and milk. Cornflakes contain 17 ingredients, including 3 types of sugar. We traded up in convenience and traded down in everything else. Johnny cakes, ground cornmeal mixed with boiling water, salt, and a spoonful of lard, shaped into flat cakes and fried on a greased griddle until crispy on the outside and creamy inside. Johnny cakes were the breakfast of New England farmers, Appalachian families, and anyone who could not afford wheat flour. The recipe traced back to Native American cooking and survived virtually unchanged for 300 years. In 1953, a plate of Johnny cakes with sorghum syrup cost less than a nickel to make. Children ate them with their hands, burning their fingers on the crispy edges. Mothers turned them with a practiced flip that sent a puff of cornmeal steam into the kitchen. By the 1960s, pancake mix from a box had replaced Johnny cakes in most American homes. A breakfast that connected families to centuries of American history was erased by Aunt Jemima and a picture on a box. The irony is staggering. We replaced something real with something manufactured and called it progress. Number 15. Leftover potato cakes. Nothing was wasted in a 1950s kitchen, especially not potatoes. Mothers mashed last night's boiled potatoes with a beaten egg, a spoonful of flour and salt, then formed patties and fried them in bacon grease until the outsides crackled golden brown. Served alongside eggs or on their own with ketchup, potato cakes turned yesterday's side dish into this morning's main course. Potatoes cost about 4 cents a pound in 1955. The egg and flour added almost nothing to the cost. Children fought over the crispiest cakes, the ones where the edges had gone almost black in the hot fat. This was recycling before anyone used the word. It was resourcefulness baked into the daily rhythm of the kitchen. Today we throw away leftover potatoes without a second thought. In 1955, that would have been unthinkable. Number 14. Coffee soup. This one shocks people, but it was absolutely real. In Scandinavian American communities across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Dakotas, breakfast was a bowl of stale bread torn into pieces, covered with hot black coffee and topped with cream and sugar. Coffee soup! It sounds terrible until you realize it is essentially a warm bread pudding made in 2 minutes with ingredients every household already had. Immigrant families brought this tradition from Sweden and Norway, where it was called kaffeost, or simply bread and coffee. By the 1950s, it had become a quiet daily ritual in farm kitchens across the upper Midwest. The coffee softened the bread into a warm, sweet mush that children actually loved. It cost virtually nothing. It used bread that would otherwise go stale, and it delivered caffeine to adults and calories to children in the same bowl. When supermarkets brought packaged donuts and toaster pastries to rural Minnesota, coffee soup disappeared within a single generation. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody thought it was worth preserving, but the families who remember it will tell you it was the taste of a farmhouse kitchen at dawn. Number 13. Hoe cakes with syrup. A hoe cake was nothing more than cornmeal, water, and salt, cooked on a greased skillet. They were named for the field tool that enslaved people once used to cook them over open fires, and they carried centuries of history in every bite. By the 1950s, they had become the everyday breakfast of rural black families across the South, cooked on cast iron and served with cane syrup or sorghum. A single bag of cornmeal could make hoe cakes for a month. The batter was stirred together in seconds, poured into the hot skillet, and flipped once when bubbles formed. The result was crispy, slightly sweet, and more satisfying than any pancake from a mix. The Civil Rights era and the Great Migration carried families north and west, and hoe cakes stayed behind. Children who grew up eating them in Mississippi woke up in Chicago and Detroit eating toast. The tradition broke quietly, without ceremony. Today, hoe cakes survive in the kitchens of grandmothers who refuse to let go. Everywhere else, they are gone. Number 12. EGG in a hole. Take a slice of bread. Cut a circle out of the center with a glass. Fry the bread in butter. Crack an egg into the hole. Cook until the white sets and the yolk stays runny. That was egg in a hole, and it was the cleverest breakfast trick of the 1950s. Mothers made it because children who refused fried eggs and children who refused toast would somehow eat both when they arrived together, looking like a surprise. The cutout circle was fried alongside and used for dipping. Nothing was wasted, not even the bread scrap. A single egg, a single slice of bread, a pat of butter. Breakfast for a child for 3 cents. The name changed from state to state. Toad in a hole, egg in a basket, one-eyed Jack. But the trick was universal. It vanished when toaster pastries and frozen waffles promised mothers they could skip the skillet entirely. Speed replaced cleverness. and breakfast lost its only magic trick. Number 11. Scrapple, third pattern break. In Pennsylvania Dutch country, scrapple was not just breakfast, it was identity. Butchers combined pork scraps, liver, and cornmeal into a loaf that was chilled, sliced, and fried until the outside shattered like glass and the inside stayed soft and savory. Every part of the hog went into scrapple, snouts, hearts, tongues, and trimmings that modern shoppers would not recognize. By 1955, scrapple sold for about 20 cents a pound at butcher shops from Lancaster to Allentown, cheaper than bacon and twice as filling. The smell of frying scrapple on a Saturday morning was the smell of Pennsylvania itself, sweet pork and toasted corn drifting through screen doors and across front porches. Children drowned it in maple syrup. Adults ate it with eggs and black coffee. But scrapple could not survive the supermarket revolution. Its short shelf five and regional identity made it impossible to scale nationally. The shrink-wrapped versions that eventually appeared in freezer cases were pale, rubbery imitations that insulted the original. As independent butchers closed, the recipes that could not be mass-produced vanished with them. Today, scrapple survives in a few diners and farmers markets. But the breakfast that once defined an entire region's morning table has been reduced to a curiosity. Number 10. Fried cornmeal and molasses. Leftover cornmeal mush from yesterday's breakfast. Sliced thick, fried hard in lard, and drizzled with blackstrap molasses. This was the breakfast that fueled cotton mills, rail yards, and factory floors across the working-class South. Blackstrap molasses cost about 15 cents a jar in 1956 and was one of the richest sources of iron and calcium available to families who could not afford fresh fruit or vegetables. The combination of fried cornmeal and molasses delivered carbohydrates, fat, and minerals in a single plate that cost less than a nickel. Children licked the sticky syrup off their fingers. Mothers ate standing at the stove, already thinking about supper. This breakfast has been completely forgotten. Molasses has disappeared from most American pantries, replaced by maple-flavored corn syrup that costs more and delivers nothing. Number 9. Grits and red-eye gravy. Grits cooked slowly in salted water until creamy, topped with the same ham gravy deglazed with coffee from number 22. Together they created something greater than either could manage alone. The grits absorbed the salty, bitter gravy, and every spoonful delivered a combination of textures and flavors that modern breakfast simply cannot touch. A pound of grits cost about 10 cents and could make breakfast for a week. The gravy came free from yesterday's ham. This was the breakfast of the Carolina Piedmont, the Georgia Wiregrass Country, and the Alabama Black Belt. It belonged to a place and a people. And when those people left the land for factories and offices, grits and red-eye gravy could not follow. Fast food breakfast replaced it. Drive-through biscuits replaced it. Something was lost that a McMuffin will never replace. Number 8. Fried moosh and eggs. This was the Midwestern cousin of the Southern cornmeal breakfast. Mothers in Ohio, Indiana, and Iowa fried slabs of chilled cornmeal mush until crackling crisp and served them alongside fried eggs, the yolks broken and mixed into the mush on the plate. A farm breakfast that cost almost nothing and stuck with a man through a morning of hard labor. The crunch of the fried mush against the soft, runny yolk was a texture combination that no modern breakfast food has replicated. Cereal is soft, toast is dry, pancakes are spongy. Nothing crunches and oozes the way fried mush and eggs did at 6 in the morning in a farmhouse kitchen with frost on the windows. Number 7. Buttermilk biscuits and sorghum. Fourth pattern break. The biscuit itself was the masterpiece. Flour, lard, buttermilk, salt, and a pinch of baking soda. Mixed fast, handled as little as possible, cut with an overturned glass, and baked in a screaming hot oven until the tops blistered golden. Mothers who could make proper biscuits were respected in their communities the way athletes are respected today. It was a skill that took years to develop and seconds to ruin. The biscuits came out of the oven steaming, split open, and drizzled with sorghum syrup so dark and thick it moved like honey in January. A 25-pound sack of flour cost about $1.50 in 1955. Lard cost pennies. Buttermilk was a byproduct of churning that farmers practically gave away. The whole breakfast cost almost nothing, and it was the best thing most people ate all day. When Pillsbury introduced refrigerated biscuit dough in the 1960s, homemade biscuits began their long, slow death. A skill that had been passed from mother to daughter for 200 years was replaced by a cardboard tube that pops when you twist it. We traded mastery for convenience, and breakfast has never recovered. A slice of toast spread with bacon drippings and then topped with a spoonful of homemade grape or apple jelly. Sweet, savory, salty, and fatty in a single bite. This was the breakfast that children in the 1950s remember most vividly. The warm grease melted into the toast. The cold jelly sat on top, and the contrast was extraordinary. Families who kept jelly and families who kept bacon grease, which was nearly everyone, had this combination in their repertoire. It cost nothing extra. It used what was already there, and it tasted like home. Number 5. Rice and milk. Cold leftover rice from last night's supper, placed in a bowl, covered with cold milk, and sprinkled with sugar. That was breakfast for millions of American families, particularly in the South and in Asian American communities across the West Coast. The rice was already cooked. The milk was already bought. The sugar was a luxury that cost 4 cents a pound. The whole thing came together in 30 seconds, with no cooking and no dishes beyond the bowl and spoon. It was the original cold cereal, predating every boxed product on the supermarket shelf. And it was better. The rice had texture. The milk stayed cold. The sugar dissolved slowly. We replaced it with Rice Krispies and called it innovation. Number 4. Clabber and cornbread. Clabber was raw milk left to sour naturally at room temperature until it thickened into a tangy, yogurt-like curd. Mothers crumbled cold cornbread into a glass, poured clabber over it, and handed it to their children. This was breakfast across the rural South before pasteurization and refrigeration made clabber impossible to produce safely. The naturally occurring probiotics in clabber made it one of the healthiest foods available to poor families. Modern food scientists have confirmed that the lactic acid fermentation in clabber produces beneficial bacteria identical to those found in expensive probiotic supplements. A food that cost nothing was doing what a $15 bottle of pills does today. When pasteurized milk became standard in the 1950s and the 1960s, clabber vanished. The bacteria that made it were killed before the milk ever reached the kitchen. A centuries-old breakfast tradition was erased by public health policy that solved one problem and created another. Number 3. Water gravy and biscuits. When there was no milk for sawmill gravy and no meat for red-eye gravy, there was water gravy. Flour browned in lard, thinned with water, seasoned with salt and black pepper, poured over biscuits. That was it. The The poorest breakfast on this list, and arguably the most important. Water gravy kept families alive during the Depression and lingered through the 1950s in pockets of Appalachia and the Deep South where poverty never fully retreated. The trick was browning the flour long enough to develop a nutty, toasted flavor that masked the absence of milk or meat. Mothers who could make water gravy taste good were performing a kind of alchemy. They turned flour, fat, water, and will into something a child would eat without crying. This breakfast has no modern equivalent. It exists only in the memories of people who grew up poor enough to need it and proud enough to remember it. Number 2, fried bread dough. When bread was baked at home, and through the early 1950s it often was, mothers would pinch off balls of raw yeast dough, flatten them, and fry them in hot lard until they puffed golden and hollow inside. Dusted with sugar or drizzled with honey, fried bread dough was the reward for the children who helped with baking day. The dough was already made. The lard was already hot. The only cost was a few minutes of patience while the dough sizzled and popped. Children stood at the stove watching through the steam, waiting for the moment when the dough turned from pale and flat to golden and swollen. The smell was intoxicating. Warm yeast, hot fat, caramelized sugar. When store-bought bread replaced home baking in the late 1950s, fried dough disappeared from weekday mornings. You can find it today at state fairs, sold for $5 a piece. In 1954, it was free, and it was better. Number 1, biscuits and pot liquor. Pot liquor was the cooking liquid left behind after boiling greens, turnips, collards, or cabbage. It was dark, rich, salty, and loaded with vitamins that had leached from the vegetables during cooking. Mothers saved it the way they saved bacon grease, in a jar on the stove, ready to be reheated and poured over split biscuits the next morning. This was breakfast for families who had almost nothing. The greens were grown in the garden. The biscuits were made from flour and lard. The pot liquor was a byproduct that would have been poured down the drain in any modern kitchen. But it contained iron, calcium, vitamin C, and potassium. It was a multivitamin in a bowl of broth served over bread that cost a penny to make. Nutritionists at Tuskegee University documented the health benefits of pot liquor as early as the 1930s, finding that families who consumed it regularly had lower rates of anemia and malnutrition. We threw it away. We poured liquid nutrition down the sink because we decided it looked ugly and smelled old-fashioned. And then we spent billions on vitamin supplements to replace what pot liquor gave us for free. This is my challenge. Try one of these breakfasts this week, just one. Try the cornmeal mush, the potato cakes, or the fried egg sandwich made the way it was meant to be made. Then come back and tell me if your grandmother was wrong. I tried water gravy on a Tuesday morning. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the plate, realizing that a woman with nothing in her pantry made something out of flour, fat, and water that tasted better than anything in my freezer. Share which one you are going to try in the comments. If your family still makes any of these, tell us where you are from. These were not just breakfasts. They were proof that the people who had the least knew the most about feeding a family.